Esther chapter 2. And after this, the king's anger was pacified, and he no more mentioned Astin, bearing in mind what she had said, and how he had condemned her. Then the servants of the king said, Let there be sought for the king chaste and beautiful young virgins. And let the king appoint local governors in all the provinces of his kingdom, and let them select fair and chaste young damsels, and bring them to the city Shushan, into the women's apartment, and let them be consigned to the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women. And let things for purification and other attendance be given to them. And let the woman who shall please the king be queen instead of Astin. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in the city Shushan, and his name was Mordecai, the son of Jairus, the son of Simeas, the son of Sisaeus, of the tribe of Benjamin, who had been brought a prisoner from Jerusalem, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried into captivity. And he had a foster child, daughter of Aminadab, his father's brother, and her name was Esther. And when her parents were dead, he brought her up for a wife for himself, and the damsel was beautiful. And because the king's ordinance was published, many damsels were gathered to the city Shushan, under the hand of Ai, and Esther was brought to Ai, the keeper of the women. And the damsel pleased him, and she found favor in his sight, and he hasted to give her the things for purification and her portion. And the 7 maidens appointed her out of the palace, and he treated her and her maidens well in the women's apartment. But Esther discovered not her family nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her not to tell. But Mordecai used to walk every day by the women's court to see what would become of Esther. Now this was the time for a virgin to go into the king, when she should have fulfilled 12 months. For so are the days of purification fulfilled, 6 months, while they are anointing themselves with the oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and women's purifications. And then the damsel goes in to the king, and the officer to whomsoever he shall give the command will bring her to come in with him from the women's apartment to the king's chamber. She enters in the evening, and in the morning she departs to the second women's apartment, where I, the king's chamberlain, is keeper of the women. And she goes not into the king again, unless she should be called by name. And when the time was fulfilled for Esther the daughter of Aminadab, the brother of Mordecai's father, to go in to the king, she neglected nothing which the chamberlain, the women's keeper, commanded, for Esther found grace in the sight of all that looked upon her. So Esther went into King Artaxerxes in the 12th month, which is Adar, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther, and she found favor beyond all the other virgins, and he put on her the queen's crown. And the king made a banquet for all his friends and great men for 7 days, and he highly celebrated the marriage of Esther, and he made a release to those who were under his dominion. But Mordecai served in the palace. Now Esther had not discovered her kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to fear God and perform his commandments, as when she was with him, and Esther changed not her manner of life. And 2 chamberlains of the king, the chiefs of the bodyguard, were grieved because Mordecai was promoted, and they sought to kill King Artaxerxes. And the matter was discovered to Mordecai, and he made it known to Esther, and she declared to the king the matter of the conspiracy. And the king examined the 2 chamberlains and hanged them. And the king gave orders to make a note for a memorial in the royal records of the good offices of Mordecai as a commendation. Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to Esther chapter 2. All I have to say is, wow, the differences in this chapter are going to be monumental, to say the least. So there are 23 verses in this chapter. In verse 1, we have a huge difference. I haven't seen a huge difference in a long time. This is our first huge difference of the book. And it reads, "And after this, the king's anger was pacified." So remember this. His anger has been appeased or pacified. So what happens next? He no more mentioned Astine or Vashti. He didn't mention her anymore, bearing in mind what she had said. So he didn't remember her or what she had said, or even how he condemned her. He just put in the past, he forgot it. You could say, put in the back of his mind. The Masoretic reads like this: he remembered Vashti. He remembered her, what she had done, what was decreed against her. So how can he be appeased, his wrath, if he remembers these things? It's counterproductive. It goes against the narrative and logic. So that's our first huge difference. Verse 2, we have another difference, a big difference, in fact. It says here, chaste. The word chaste was omitted, which denotes she was not only a virgin, but also chaste. That could be in practice and in mental attitude, just a lady, a young maiden of chastity. Chaste in many ways, altogether chaste. Verse 3, it reads here, chaste young damsels versus virgins. There's an addition of the name Hege, the chamberlain. There's an omission of and other attendants. Verse 7, this is probably the biggest verse, one of the big verses of this chapter. Foster child. Okay, so just that term was being used in the Septuagint. The Masoretic, it says she had neither father nor mother. It's essentially the same thing. In regards to this verse, exposition is Esther was the daughter of his father's brother, so his cousin, versus his uncle's daughter. Again, same thing. Esther is his cousin. Now, I have to address this issue. I feel like it's really important. Let's address it after I talk about the name. So the name Esther is Hadassah in Hebrew. Let's look this up. It says Hadassah, and this means myrtle. Means myrtle. Okay, her Jewish name, Myrtle, which is an English name used in English society. Stara is the ancient Persian version. In modern Farsi, Setare. In English, star. Aster in Greek, and in Arabic, Najma. Okay, and there's an addition of the word fair. So I want to bring up this huge difference, another huge difference, second one in the book. The omission of he brought her up, Mordecai did, for what? Because he's good-hearted? No, for a wife. He's going to marry his cousin. He was raising her to be his wife. Eventually, when she was ready, when the time was right. Is this against Torah? No. The answer is no. When discussing this story, actually with my father, my earthly father, he was mentioning how the perception seems to be, it's not explicit, but the perception is Mordecai is Esther's uncle. That's the perception from the reader's point of view, especially in the Masoretic, when you omit this fact. So the point is, having intimate relations between an uncle and his niece, that is forbidden in Torah. It's actually worse in the Masoretic if we're taking it from that perception, for interpreting in that way. But notice, relations between cousins is not forbidden by Torah. It's actually continued even into this day by people in the Middle East and parts of Asia, and that's all fine. It's completely kosher with the Torah. It's what's the word? It's not haram in the Sharia law either. Okay, so that's that. That's verse 7. Now we're going to skip ahead to verse 10. Discovered or uncovered. She did not uncover her kindred, her people. Verses did not show. In verse 13, we see procedure taking place. And it says here, the damsel goes into the king, and then the officer, to whomsoever he shall give the command, will then bring her to come in with him, with the officer, from the women's apartment to the king's chamber. So that is one procedure as outlined in the Septuagint. In the Masoretic, it reads, thus came every maiden unto the king. And there's an addition. Whatsoever she desired, whatever she wants, was given her to go with her out of the house. So whatever she wanted, she can bring to the king's house. So again, just to boil it down a little more simply, the damsel goes from the women's lodgings to the king's room. That's the Septuagint version of the procedure, the process. In the Masoretic, whatever the maiden wants was given for her when she left the house of the women to go before the king. Verse 14. Significant difference. In the morning, which is before noon, probably 9 a.m., between 9 to 12, I'm going to say maybe even 6 to 9, 6 to 10, well before noon, versus the morrow. So the next day, at some point, no specific time is given. And I don't know if it's my dirty mind, but I was thinking about how this is like a one-night stand, in a sense. I mean, yes, he owns these ladies. They're part of his harem, essentially. The lady would enter in the evening to obviously have intimate relations with the king, and then in the morning she leaves. That's a lot of one-night stands, isn't it? That's how it's depicted in popular culture. This is an ancient practice. Okay, it's not something new, nothing new under the sun. Verse 15, a significant difference, possibly even a big difference. It reads here, she neglected nothing, talking about Esther. She neglected nothing which the chamberlain, the women's keeper, commanded, versus he required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. So the Septuagint is saying Esther did not neglect her duties. In fact, she fulfilled what was asked of her by the chamberlain, versus she, or I should say he, actually it's he, isn't it? Let me just read this one more time. He required nothing. Oh, she, okay, so that's a typo. She required nothing. So Esther did not ask anything in addition to what she's been given from the chamberlain. She's not asking anything additional. Okay, verse 16, big difference, a third one. Actually, is this the first one? Because we've had two huge differences. It says here the 12th month, which is Adar. Is this correct? It seems to be. Verse 16. The 12th month, Adar, versus the 10th month, which is Tebeth or Tev. Verse 18. There's an addition of, and gave gifts according to the state of the king. Where does that say? That's in the addition. According to the state of the king. So this is culturally done in the Middle East in ancient times and even today. This practice. There's an omission for 7 days. For 7 days. That's how long the feast was, the duration of the feast. A big difference as well in this verse. There's an omission of he highly celebrated, note, the marriage of Esther versus Esther's feast. So this was a wedding feast, a 7-day wedding feast, like Sukkot, not merely a fun bash or party Esther just wanted to have, just want to throw a party. Why? For no reason at all. Because, girls just want to have fun. They just want to have fun. No, that's not what it's about. It's about the wedding. She's getting married to King Artaxerxes. That's what's happening here. Okay, that's verse 18. Verse 19, big difference. But Mordecai served in the palace versus Mordecai sat in the king's gate. So when I first read this book in the King James, I pictured Mordecai like a homeless guy sitting outside the gate or within the gate, but he's not in the palace. That's for sure. That's not the way I perceive the story. So what a difference. He is in the palace. He's serving there versus being somewhere in the king's realm. So this proves the prologue of chapter 1 is true, because it was mentioned that he was indeed serving in the palace. Verse 20, another big difference, perhaps even a huge difference, an omission of the following. What did Mordecai command her? We don't know. We don't know in the Masoretic. He charged her, what? To do as... We're not given the information. The Septuagint thankfully provides the commandment of Mordecai to his cousin Esther, which is to fear God, or Elohim, to fear God and perform his commandments. Where do you remember this? At the end of Ecclesiastes. This is what King Solomon said. Listen, hear the sum of the matter. This is the conclusion of the matter. This is the whole of man. This is the sum of man, to fear God and keep his commandments. Mordecai's instructions are the same as Solomon's reflection at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. And then it says here, she didn't just do this, but as when she was with him. It says, she had not discovered her kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to do the following, as when she was with him. And Esther, note this, I want to read this slowly. And Esther changed not her manner of life. Let me repeat that. Esther changed not her manner of life. She didn't have one set of values and morals before being part of the kingdom, then changed it after she was promoted to this great position. She was a fine example, a prime example to young women of faith, and in fact all people of faith. So this is a similar witness, in my opinion, of what was given regarding Daniel, how he did not compromise with his faith and his behavior. Okay? Because also he was part of the Persian Empire too, wasn't he? Okay, so that's all for... Oh, no, there's more. It says, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, we're not given what it was, like as when she was brought up with him. So it's a lot stronger in the Septuagint because it's more specific, and it even gives her a great honor here as to how she lived. That's important. Verse 21, big difference, an omission. Again, a lot of omissions in this chapter. It says, because Mordecai was promoted. Why were they grieved? Why were they angry even? Because he was promoted. That was not provided in the Masoretic. We don't know he's promoted. Again, this supports the prologue of chapter 1, the 3 paragraphs that were missing. Verse 22 says, declared to the king versus certified the king. And then a big difference in our last verse, 23, and the king gave orders to make a note for a memorial in the royal records of the good offices, of Mordecai. Why as a commendation versus, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So this was written as an honor and letter, perhaps, or record of commendation to Mordecai, versus this was an event that was recorded, but no honor was put upon his reputation, Mordecai's reputation, at least explicitly, as it is written in the Septuagint. So that's all for this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. Until next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum. Peace be unto you, and Maranatha.